Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Reserved Investments, and thank you for joining me. So before I get to the crux of this video, I do have to give a shout out to Pat the NES Punk, also known as Pat Contry. He's a great friend of this channel, and he has been putting out these Ultimate Nintendo Guidebooks. Shameless plug for him. I get nothing out of this. I just want to let you guys know that if you do have an interest in the Nintendo, the Super Nintendo, or the Nintendo 64, these books are incredible. They are full-color books that show you in depth a lot of the games that were released for these incredible systems. So I do want to give him a shout out because we have collaborated on certain projects. He has sent me these books, and I do really appreciate these books. They are an excellent resource for any video game collector, enthusiast, investor, speculator. If you're just a Nintendo fan in general, you owe it to yourself to check out these books. So now that that's out of the way, let's talk about the Nintendo Wii U. You know, interesting thing has been developing with Nintendo systems over the years. Usually, believe it or not, when a product pretty much fails or doesn't do well on the overall market, the perception of that product can change over time. This is why, like me, I look back and I remember when the Virtual Boy was first released back in 1995. I remember I bought my Virtual Boy system at Babbage's at the King of Prussia Mall back in 1995 when I was a senior in high school. That particular system cost me $159.99 plus tax, and it came packaged with Mario's Tennis, if I recall at the time. I actually thought the system was unique and quirky. Now, did I really like it as much as my Super Nintendo or my original Nintendo or even my Game Boy? The answer is no. But I thought it was a unique product. I honestly wish that Nintendo would have put some more thought into the design, maybe attempted to add more color to it, because if you guys remember, the Nintendo Virtual Boy was black and red monochrome, and that really turned a lot of people off. Also, if you used it for any length of time, you could develop headaches, you could develop other issues. So a lot of users weren't really in to the Virtual Boy. But looking back on that product right now, I get very nostalgic for that system, even though it was considered Nintendo's worst failure of all time. So it always has really been fascinating to me, especially with my work in the antiques and collectibles trade. You can have a product that hits the market and fails, and literally 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years go by, people rediscover it, and now the product is hot once again. That's what makes some of these markets so fascinating. But let's talk about Nintendo in general. Nintendo obviously did not hit a home run with the Virtual Boy. And to be fair, Nintendo struggled a little bit there. Let's be realistic. They had a hit with the Nintendo. They had a hit with the Game Boy. They had a hit with the Super Nintendo. Even the Nintendo 64. The Nintendo 64 was a great system, and it was a success. But it struggled against the Sony Playstation. Both Nintendo and Sega underestimated Sony, and they both paid the ultimate price. Proof is, right now as we head into the year 2025, what are the three big boys in the video game business at present time? Nintendo, Sony, and Microsoft. You didn't hear me mention Sega. Sega got wiped out. Nintendo has been fighting neck and neck with Sony, and Sony has been holding their own. Case in point, we're already at the 5th iteration of the PlayStation, and there's rumored to be a 6th PlayStation coming sometime soon in the future. So that should tell you something. So another thing that I want to bring up here is, believe it or not, my favorite vintage or retro Nintendo console of all time is the GameCube. And ironically, when the Nintendo GameCube first came out, I bought it on launch day at Toys R Us. I got Luigi's Mansion and Star Wars Rogue Leader with that particular system. I remember I played it till my fingers bled, but then I don't know, it just didn't hold my attention. Because at that particular point in time, I also had the Sega Dreamcast, and Sony PlayStation 2 was also launching. And that was the system that a lot of my attention went to. When the Sony PlayStation 2 came out, I considered that to be one of the greatest video game systems of all time up until that point. Now, what's interesting here is, though, as I look back, I have a lot of fond memories with the Nintendo GameCube. And I didn't realize it at the time, but the Nintendo GameCube would become one of my favorite Nintendo home video game consoles of all time. Now, what does this all mean? Well, for those of you unaware, I remember when the Nintendo Wii U was discontinued. And a lot of people thought the Nintendo Wii U is going to be the next big collectible vintage Nintendo system in just a few short years or a couple of decades. And I remember I was really doubtful on that because I kind of knew Nintendo's strategy. Nintendo right out of the gate announced with the launch of the Nintendo Switch platform that, hey, we're going to be porting Mario Kart 8 from the Nintendo Wii U to the Nintendo Switch. So in my mind, I could see what was already going to start to happen. Nintendo was going to start to port a lot of their popular Nintendo franchises that made an appearance on the Wii U to the Nintendo Switch. And they just announced that Xenoblade Chronicles X, one of the greatest Japanese action RPGs of all time, in my opinion, is going to be remastered for the Nintendo Switch. And it will be a day one purchase for me. And that really caused me to want to do this video. Because in all honesty, there's really only 3 real Nintendo exclusives that have yet to be ported to the Nintendo Switch. And those games are Paper Mario, Color Splash, Star Fox Zero, and Nintendo Land. Now let's be honest here. I don't think that they're going to port Nintendo Land to the Nintendo Switch. I don't think it'll do well if they would port that game. Honestly, Nintendo Land was more of a tech demo to show off the capabilities of the Wii U and its fancy controller when it first launched. Star Fox Zero, that particular game was average at best just due to the control scheme. If they would work on the control scheme, they could port that to the Nintendo Switch and it would probably sell much better than it sold on the now failed Nintendo Wii U system. Really, right now, if we're really going to have to conduct a list of games here that are must-haves for the Nintendo Wii U, the only major title that is remaining that got a major release and announcement from the manufacturer, Nintendo, is Paper Mario Color Splash. So that's really, at present time, one of the only reasons to own a Nintendo Wii U when we talk about spectacular games that have yet to be ported to the Nintendo Switch. I bring this up because it's very interesting how the concept of change affected how people now feel about the collectability of the Nintendo Wii U going into the future from where we were when it was discontinued. There were a lot of YouTubers out there that predicted that the Nintendo Wii U would become massively collectible in the future. And at this particular point in time, with Nintendo, with Sony, focusing on remastering a lot of their games and re-releasing games from other platforms of theirs onto their current platform, I just don't see that happening. I mean, I was really disappointed that Nintendo chose to remaster Donkey Kong Country Returns for the Nintendo Switch. I know there's a lot of fans of that game out there. I know I get a lot of slack when I state that in videos because there's a lot of people that disagree with me. But Donkey Kong Country Returns was released both on the original Nintendo Wii and also on the Nintendo 3DS system. Do we really need another version to be released at a manufacturer-suggested retail price of $59.99 for the Nintendo Switch roughly 10 or 12 years later? I think it's getting ridiculous what a lot of these companies are doing with remasters and ports. And Nintendo in particular has gotten a lot of criticism, especially from me, because they tend to port the same games over and over again. They're more popular titles. They're Mario titles. They're Zelda titles. Why they tend to ignore great game franchises like Kid Icarus or F-Zero or Star Fox. And this is why I want to have this discussion. It's really interesting to me how, as we look at the future of video game collecting, in all honesty, in my opinion, I see the lesser known titles that are being ignored at present time as being potentially more collected than a lot of the popular games and franchises. Now, obviously, there's exceptions to every rule. I do see titles like Super Mario 3D All-Stars being collected into the future simply because it is a remaster of 3 great 3D Mario games. Let's be honest here, guys. But I do see a lot of these lesser titles, like Emio the Smiling Man. That's a game that really was released in physical form, at least in the United States, and you can't find it at most retailers. You literally have to order that game online if you want to buy it. I really think that's going to be a game that's going to be sought after in the future, because I don't see Nintendo releasing that game again or adding it to like a Nintendo Selects budget line somewhere down the line. I just don't see that happening with that type of mature game. The same thing is true with some of these other titles that have been coming out as of late. For instance, I thought that Tokyo Mirage FE Sessions was a great game that first debuted on the Wii U, that Nintendo did, ironically, port to the Nintendo Switch. But as soon as that game got ported, it just seems that Nintendo only did one production run of that game, and then they just stopped producing it. And that's another game that I do think will be coveted 10, 20 years down the line if younger generations do flock to collecting physical media. So I guess my point is, there's opportunities in these markets, but these markets are always changing and evolving, especially when we talk about the Wii U. Again, when the Wii U was discontinued, there was a lot of YouTubers out there, there's a lot of other people, video game enthusiasts, collectors, all stating that the Wii U is going to be coveted in 10, 20 years from now. And again, when we look at the changing dynamics of the market, I just don't see that happening. Now, I honestly believe at some point, Nintendo is going to end up releasing Paper Mario Color Splash, whether it be on the Nintendo Switch or the newly announced, unknown Nintendo Switch 2, which appears to be completely backwards compatible with the original Nintendo Switch. When it launches sometime in 2025, 2026, who knows? So I do see that being a possibility. But the whole point of doing this video is to show you guys the concept of change, the perception of change, where you can have a product. It could either be a mass failure or it can be a tremendous success. And neither status dictates how collectible it's going to be in the future or how it's going to be viewed by collectors and enthusiasts alike. And this is something that you have to keep in mind if you are speculating, if you are investing in the antiques and collectibles trade. It doesn't matter what market you're in. Remember, one of the things that I teach on this channel, antiques are rooted in history. Collectibles are rooted in nostalgia. Both markets are governed by change. This is why I always tell people, the only constant in the entire antiques and collectibles trade is change. You must stay abreast of these markets if you attempt to invest in them. Now, again, if you're just a collector, if you're somebody you really like Nintendo games, maybe you already have Xenoblade Chronicles X for the Nintendo Wii U, and you want to buy it again for the Nintendo Switch, you want to play it, you want to put it on your shelf, you want to own it. I think it's going to retail probably for $59.99. If that doesn't bother you at that price point, you can just put it on the shelf and forget about it. You do you. But I do know there's a lot of people out there that are speculating and attempting to invest in these markets. This is why I continue to put out videos on this channel that teach people how to properly analyze these markets and how to properly allocate capital to them over the short term and over the long term. So I hope you enjoyed today's discussion. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. And as always, I will see you in the next video. Thank you and good night.